Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's event. My name is Scott, and I'm with Edance Learning Lab, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We've got guests from all around the world, as usual, and a special welcome to our guests from China. This is our first global webinar featuring guests from China, so welcome to all of you. And I see we've got a great number of visitors from India as well. A big welcome to all of you too. And wherever you are around the world, thanks again so much for joining us today. So first, a bit about Edance. Come and visit us at edance.com/scientific solutions. Edance, if you don't know us, we've been helping researchers for more than 25 years. And we are based in China and Japan, but we have a network of more than 300 research experts around the world who are ready to help you with innovative solutions. But our main expert today is the wonderful Dr. Gareth Dyke. Gareth, are you there?
I'm here, and welcome everybody to our training session today. Thanks, thanks Scott for the start off. Shall we jump to the slides and get going and say again, like, welcome everybody and thanks for joining us, and yeah, wonderful to see you here. And we're going to be talking about peer review, but not in the way that you might be expecting. You've probably attended loads of webinars about peer review over the last few months, like now that we're all online still, like of course, like lots and lots of webinars, but peer review, I know, like you've probably heard many sessions about peer review. Gareth is my name. I won't dwell on my background, but I did my PhD in the UK. I worked in the United States. I worked in Ireland. I worked in the UK. I published a number of papers, some in good journals, some in bad journals, some highly cited, some not so highly cited, and I work also as an editor at a number of international journals, as well as with Scott and colleagues doing training and working with the Edance team, the Edance Learning Lab. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Of course, if you'd like to get in touch at any time over the course of our webinar today, you can do so by clicking on the chat box on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar platform. You can ask us questions at any time. You can get in touch with us now or afterwards. You can have a look at our websites. We showed you our new website just a few moments ago. That's exciting. That's something that happened just this week. So we're all very happy to show it off for the first time, like our new Edance services page. But let's get back. I know you're here, you're joining us today in order to talk about peer review. So we'll get started and we'll have a think about what we mean in our training about peer review today. So as I mentioned a moment ago, you're probably thinking, not another webinar about peer review. I've attended millions of those over the last few months. Well, this one will be a little bit different. We certainly hope. And here's what we're going to talk about in our training session today. We're going to jump off by talking about things that you already know. Peer review, what it is and how it works. So that won't take all that long. And if you'd like to get more information about the peer review process, or indeed training in how to do peer review, then please get in touch, because we have lots of content, lots of training on our Edance Learning Lab. We're then going to talk for most of our session today about the issues that people encounter in the peer review process. And what we're going to do is provide you with suggestions as to how you can solutioneer your way around those problems. That's what we do at Edance. We provide research solutions all the way through the research journey. We don't just do editing. We don't just do language services. Oh no, we do lots more. So you'll get to see in this presentation how our Edance experts solve those tough peer review problems. And then, of course, as usual, and don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. If you have them, we'll come back, we'll answer them at the end. You'll have the chance to ask us anything. So let's jump off. Let's start by talking about what peer review is. And we'll begin by launching a quick poll. Scott's going to do that so that we can ask you, our lovely audience, friends from all over the world joining us today, what do you feel the main function of peer review is? Scott?
Okay, let's try our poll. What's the main function of peer review? What do you think? To separate top journals from all the other journals? To provide more busy work for editors and reviewers? Well, it certainly does that. Or to filter and improve content for others to read? This is probably an easy question, too easy for our smart audience. I'm having some fun here. I think nobody's fooled by my silly answers. Everyone went straight to the third choice, I think. Some people answering the first one, that's true as well.
We do encourage everybody to get involved. Join us, answer the questions, because you'll get a lot more out of this if you get involved, if you get engaged. And let me say as well, as we get started today, don't worry if I talk too fast, if Scott talks too fast. You'll get a recording of this event at the end of the training, and you'll also get a certificate of attendance. I know that's important for lots of people as well. So don't worry if you miss something. You'll have the chance to listen back to this presentation again whenever you like. How are we doing with the poll, Scott?
Okay, it looks like we've got almost 70% of votes in. Let's close the poll. Looks like most people were not fooled by my silly answers. Most people selected the third choice, to filter and improve content for others. Maybe the first choice has some truth to it. Yes, it does sort of separate the top journals from the others. But we're going to focus on this third one today, right, Gareth? Oh, Gareth, we can't quite hear you, I think.
Yep, sorry about that. I'm back. Don't worry, I pressed the mute button by mistake. We always ask this question at the start of our webinars, at the start of our training sessions, because of course we want to find out what you feel the main function of peer review is. Lots of authors feel that they actually end up getting traumatized by the peer review process, but really this process, the cornerstone of academic publishing, filters and improves content for researchers. So that is the basis of peer review. I know you already knew that, but let's have a quick look at some perceptions of peer review across the academic community. It should be a positive process. It often isn't, of course, but it should be a positive process. Often people, as I've mentioned, get to the end of the peer review process and they feel like it's been a traumatic ordeal. They feel relieved that their paper finally gets published. It should improve your manuscript. It should advance the field. But you can also, as a researcher, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, you can get involved in the peer review process if you have the opportunity. So it's the process we use to judge the quality of academic papers submitted for publication in those scholarly journals. And peer-reviewed papers, of course, are thought to be reliable because they've undergone this process before publication. So you shouldn't be picking a journal that doesn't use peer review. If you have questions about journal selection, of course, we'll be here to answer them at the end of this training. Today, we also have a great tool on our EdAnts Learning Lab site, a free tool, the Journal Selector tool that you can have a look at to try and pick your next journal. So we've talked about what peer review is. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about how peer review works. Different kinds of peer review. You may be aware of these. Blind peer review, where the reviewer is anonymous to the author. Double blind, where both the reviewer and the author are anonymous. Open, where no one is anonymous. Is that such a good idea? We'll talk about that in a minute. And transferable peer review, where data and comments are shared after the process. So maybe your paper gets rejected from one journal. The comments made in initial peer review can be transferred to another journal, to another publisher to speed up the process. We're going to talk about open and double blind and blind peer review again, of course, in a minute. But isn't it interesting to have a look at the data in this table? Some countries, the uptake of double blind peer review, where both reviewers and authors are anonymous, is higher. which do you think is better? And indeed, how can double-blind peer review help your paper to get successfully published? This great table that comes from PLOS summarizes the different kinds of peer review that international journals use. It's a great resource, so when you have access to the recording of this presentation later, you may wish to have another look at this slide, the different kinds of peer review that different international journals use. So I know you're all authors, you're all researchers. Let's launch another quick poll and ask you, which kinds of peer review have you experienced in your career so far? Scott?
Great. Here are our choices, blind or double blind. If you've experienced this kind of peer review, please click there. Next is signed, including cases where the reviewers' names are published, although those are two slightly different types. Collaborative, where reviewers give joint comments on your paper, or sometimes with the author to collaborate on the review. There's portable or transferable, where comments can be taken to another journal, and post-publication, where your paper is reviewed in a community, by a community, in an open forum. Now, if you're a graduate student, you probably have experienced, even if you haven't published in a peer-reviewed journal yet, you probably have experienced through your graduate program one or more of these. For example, a signed review, you might have obviously an advisor who reviews your paper for you. You might, well, in my dissertation, for example, we had collaborative reviews where other students reviewed our papers and so on. So if you are not yet published and you're still a student, you might have experienced some of these as well. So everyone, please click on whichever types of reviews you've experienced.
Yeah, so I can see that the poll results are coming in, and most people answering this poll are going for either signed or double blind. And I must say, Scott, that my favorite kind of peer review as an author now based in Hungary, as opposed to being based in the UK and Ireland before that, my favorite kind of peer review now, as you'll see in a minute, is the double blind kind.
Interesting. Okay, so our votes are coming in, and let's close the poll now. If you haven't had a chance to vote, that's all right. We've got some 65% of votes in now. So let's close the poll and check our results. So 85% of us have experienced double blind, 23% have experienced signed and or published, 15% collaborative, 13% portable or transferable, and 7% have gone through post-publication review.
It's very interesting, and we'll come back to these results a little bit later in this presentation today. But as an author, as a researcher submitting your work for journals, it's also very important, we would say, and we know this from our training around the world, it's also very important as an author to understand what goes on inside the heads of those peer reviewers. Why is that important? Well, if you understand what people are thinking about when they assess your papers for potential publication, you can, of course, increase your chances of successfully navigating the process. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are peer reviewers checking for? And again, this slide, we put it in as a resource for you, dear colleagues. When you listen again and you look back at this presentation later, you can take a screenshot of this slide. What are the kinds of things that peer reviewers checking for when they look at your paper, so that you can make sure that you include them in your work, so you can have complete data, good analyses, appropriate methodology. Probably the most important of all, the most papers that get rejected, the number one reason for academic article rejection is issues in the method section. Also then, we encourage you to understand peer review as both an author. You're going to enhance your article's chances of acceptance. You're going to be able to more efficiently respond to those comments, as well as a reviewer. Now, you may not yet have experience reviewing academic papers for journals. Don't worry, that will happen. Of course, at some point in your career, you'll get contacted by a journal editor, and they'll ask you to perform peer review. So important to think about this again, so that you can better understand the process and increase your article's chances of acceptance. So as a reviewer, you're going to comment constructively on the work of others. And this is a key transferable skill. By the way, we provide training courses in exactly this. So if you're listening to this and you think, ooh, I'd love a training course on peer review, perhaps for my students, you can get in touch with us at the end as well. Now, as a journal editor, 17 years, I know I look a lot younger than I actually am. I've seen it all. And here's a real email that I got about a year ago from an author. Think about this as an author yourself. Should you be sending these kinds of emails to editors? Who reviewed my paper? I need to know. The comments I received are extremely unfair and just plain wrong. One of the issues in peer review, of course, is managing the process. And you can certainly help yourself as an author by getting inside the heads of those peer reviewers. Now, often reviewers, they want to hide their identities because, of course, authors can get quite aggressive if negative comments or minor comments are made about the work. So journals often want blind review. Editors may offer this to reviewers to get more honest comments. Reviewers may want to be blinded from authors so that they can be more honest, but people often say, well, you like blind review, Gareth, you want your papers reviewed and you don't want the editor, the reviewer, sorry, to know your identity. This can, of course, also be open to abuse. So thinking about blind peer review as an author, we can help you to do that. So you can pick a journal that may be using double-blind peer review if you feel that that's going to give your papers a higher chance of eventual acceptance. What's best for you? You're the boss, you're the author, you're the researcher. Double-blind, single-blind, or 100% open. We, of course, encourage people to get in touch with us, understand the use of preprint servers and open peer review. So considering a journal that uses double-blind peer review, that's a situation where the identities of both you, the author, and the reviewer are hidden from each other. Some things not to do. Of course, if you want to hide your identity in an academic article that you've submitted to a journal, you're going to have to submit the title page and the acknowledgements as separate files. Journals will ask you to do that anyway, but here's some other less obvious ones. Make sure you remove your identity from Word documents and PDFs, otherwise the reviewer can find out who you are. Anonymize those place names. Don't write "as we previously showed" and then cite yourself, because of course that gives away the house. The reviewer's going to know who you are. You can help yourself in this process. So if you're submitting to a journal that uses double-blind peer review, and I would recommend that you do, that's my experience, you'll see a bit more about that in a minute. Does the journal use blind review? Make sure to do these things first. Turn off all your track changes, remove those author identification marks, and cite your own work anonymously. We get lots of papers submitted to our journal which does use this process. We give authors the choice, and we often see this in submissions. Now then, we're going to come on to the main part of our training today. We're going to talk about common problems that authors encounter in the peer review process, and we're going to give you some solutions to those problems. At EdAnts, we're all about solutions, solutioneering, which of course is just like mountaineering, except you don't have to get out of bed, as I always say. Let's recognize some of those common problems in peer review. Number one, problematic requests from reviewers. During peer review, you should not be asked as a submitting author to add citations to papers written by that reviewer, make changes to more favorably reflect earlier work, or modify or remove even hypotheses to placate to keep a reviewer happy. If you have issues in this process as an author, then we recommend that you write to the journal editor and ask for help. You'll see some examples of this in a moment when we bring in some other EdAnts team members. They're going to talk, we're going to give you some examples of how they've managed this process, because of course we do this at EdAnts. We work with authors managing the whole process. So if that's of interest to you, if you feel that you would benefit from that kind of help, check out our site, edance.com. Have a look at our brand new services page. If you're having issues as an author, write to the editor. So one of the #1 problems that authors encounter in the peer review process is, of course, a long delay. I'm sure you've experienced this. What should you do if your paper gets stuck in the system? Now, lots of authors ask us this. People stick up their hands at workshops. They say, I've waited 2 years. I always bury my head in my hands. If you have a paper that's been more than 6 weeks in review, then you should write to the editor. We can provide you templates for doing this. We see that our paper is still awaiting reviews. Can we make some suggestions to speed up the process? Give something back to editors. Don't be aggressive. Don't go in with those crazy emails. I've shown you one example earlier in this presentation. Get involved and write to the editor. Don't wait, communicate. Here's a picture from a Nature survey, the waiting game. How long have people waited for their papers to get published? And you can see some horrifying cases here, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years. There's even 3% of those surveyed responses where people have waited more than 5 years for their paper to come out. So very important. #1 issue with peer review, actually, don't wait, communicate. Stay confident about your work as well. I always say, I know Scott does as well, that being confident about your research is a #1 transferable skill to stand you in good stead as an international researcher. I've had papers that got hammered in the peer review process. You can see a few examples of them on this slide. We got negative comments. We felt the comments were unfair, so we wrote to the editor. We asked for another chance. We appealed those decisions. Confidence about your research is a key to success as a reviewer, as an author, excuse me. So let's have a look at another poll just to make sure you're all still awake. You received this comment in your rejection letter. What are you going to do, Scott?
Okay, the comment says, it is not possible to consider your manuscript in its current form. Okay, if you get this comment from a reviewer, what do you do? Choice 1, no means no. I'll take my manuscript somewhere else. No means yes, I'll resubmit without changing anything. Or still a chance, I'll revise per their comments and resubmit. What would you do in this case? Go ahead to the poll and click your answers now. Let's see what our audience thinks.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very important, ladies and gentlemen, to keep in mind that these days at academic journals, you're not actually getting a personal email from an editor. What you're getting is an email from an automated system, ScholarOne, Manuscript Central, Editorial Manager, Open Journal Manager, one of these online systems that international journals use to track peer review. So an editor has clicked on a button and the key is in the wording. What's the poll showing us, Scott?
Okay, we've got almost 70% of votes in. If you haven't voted, please click your response now. We're going to close the poll in just a moment. Looks like most of our votes are heading towards the third option. Still a chance. Okay, let's close the poll and take a look at the results. So we had 29% are taking that as a hard rejection. No means no. We've got a very bold 1%. They're just going to resubmit. And then 70% said maybe they'll take their chances and revise and resubmit. What do you think, Gareth?
I think that as I've just mentioned, as an editor for 17 years now, it's all online, it's all automated. The key's in the wording, as 70% of you correctly identified. It is not possible to consider your manuscript in its current form. This means that you can revise the paper, change it, write back to the editor and ask, if I'm able to make all of the changes suggested by the peer reviewers, will you let me have another go at a submission to your journal? What if the journal is Nature? What if the journal is science, the wording gives the game away. Journals often leave the door open for authors to resubmit. These are called soft rejections. You may get a rejection, you may feel that you have no chance, but in the wording of that email that comes back from the editor is the key. There will be words that they use, because these are automated systems, that give you the clue that you could go back with a resubmission. So here are a few examples where you're being invited to resubmit. That's not to say, however, that journals will not outright reject. And we put together from our archive, from our experience, a number of wordings that you'll see in those emails that come back from editors where it would be the case that you should go to another journal. We wish you luck publishing your results elsewhere is pretty clear. Going to another journal in that case is going to be a good option. Here are a few other emails that I got from authors I wanted to share with you so that you can see what they look like. Here's a good example of a rejection. The authors got rejected. They wrote, "Thank you for considering my manuscript. Thanks to the reviewers for their valuable and constructive comments and suggestions. If you give me the chance to make the revisions to my manuscript, I will consider all the reviewers' comments and I will fully satisfy them." So that's a great email. In this case, of course, the editor will react positively. It's all about psychology. It's all about being polite. Whereas I give up, the referees can calm down. I get the impression that they will just come up with another whinge or delay or frustrate. So maybe just forget that I submitted the paper and I'll find somewhere else with more open-minded referees who don't hide behind anonymity. These are real emails. We're not making these up. Remember, editors are just using automated systems. So once you know that, as an author, you can effectively manage those emails that come back. And of course, as an editor, let me tell you that it works both ways. I have to deal with angry peer reviewers as well. Here's an example that we got just the week before last. We're asking the peer reviewer to maybe have a look at speeding up their review. Well, the authors should have written a better paper then, was the first email that came back. Second email about 2 minutes later, find another reviewer. Please remove my name from your database. So it's well worth, as an author, also keeping in mind what editors have to deal with. These are often not professionals. They're working as academics in universities around the world. They have to manage the peer review process. It's also the case, as we'll talk about in our Q&A in a little bit, that peer review bias certainly does exist. I have experienced this myself. Here's a paper that we published. Eventually, it was rejected 3 times. Hungarian, Romanian names, institution names on the paper. It finally got published when we added the University of Manchester. So in cases like this, for these kinds of reasons, I'm advocating double-blind peer review, because bias in peer review certainly does exist. We can help you deal with it. You can put yourself ahead of the game, of course, by selecting journals that use double-blind peer review, if you think that's going to help with your submission process. And again, let me emphasize, if you go to a journal or you pick the double-blind peer review process, make sure you do actually anonymize all those documents. As an editor as well, I put together a little guide here that helps you to understand the kinds of reviews that we tend to get as editors. I call them the 7 dwarfs of peer review. You can have a look at this a little bit later when you listen potentially to this recording. But you know, we get lots of different kinds of reviews: cursory, aggressive, thoughtful, jealous. That's where the reviewer, you know, wants to be one of the authors. Late, angry. You know, I showed you an example of an angry email that we received at our journal a little bit ago. And then invisible. This is the worst kind of peer review. This is those papers that we get into our editorial office that we just can't find any reviewers to look at. So in these situations, rather than make the author wait those crazy lengths of time that you've seen on some of our previous slides, I would go back to them and say, look, we really can't find reviewers. Maybe you should consider a different journal. We're going to ask you to share some of your comments with us in the chat box now. Do you have experiences of these kinds of peer reviewers? What kinds of peer review problems have you faced, and how were you able to solve them? Scott?
Great. So this will be a chat box poll. So at the very bottom of your control panel there, you'll see the chat box. If you've had a nightmare experience or just any kind of experience, a problematic experience with peer review, we'd love to hear from you. You can enter your experience there in the chat box. You can just give us a very brief summary of your experience. We'd love to hear about it. But now we're going to go to some of our own EDONS experts and ask them the same question that I just asked you, which is, what is a peer review problem that you've faced? So these are ooh, scary. Where did we get that scary image? That is really scary. Here are some peer review nightmares faced by our experts. Over to you, Gareth.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk these through, and what I'm going to do for this section of the presentation, because I haven't seen these before, is I'm going to put on my double-blind peer review blindfold. I'm going to just do that now. And Scott, why don't you read out the comments? And you can see our EDANS experts. If you work with us, if you choose to send your paper to us, like, these are some of the experts that you would get to work with, that would get to look at your papers. Scott?
Okay, I'm gonna just do a check and make sure that you are properly blinded. I'm making a funny face at you right now. You can't see this, right? Okay, good. Here's problem number one. We asked this to, or we heard this from one of our experts, Mary. She said, sometimes authors get comments back from peer review, and it's hard to persuade them to make changes. Okay, before we hear Mary's solution to this, let's ask our resident expert here, Dr. Gareth Dyke. What do you do in these cases? Persuading
I've been an
authors to
author.
make changes.
Yeah. As both an author and an editor, I know that this can be a huge problem, because of course it's your work. You stand behind your research. You know, you are the author. So if you get comments that you don't agree with, and you don't want to make changes, it's often it's often like you get into that stubborn mindset and you just don't want to do it. But I mean, I would say compromise is important. So have a think as an author about what you could face changing in your paper in order to get it published. I mean, of course, without compromising the work itself. So.
Okay, let's go to the next slide and see how Mary and our team handled that problem. I know you're blinded, Gareth, but can you find your your right arrow key and move to the next slide?
I think I've done it, haven't I?
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Sorry, Gareth. Here's Mary's solution. She said, we talk to authors all the time and we help them to manage their submissions. This sometimes means making compromises with their work in order to ensure their papers do get accepted. Now that's interesting. This word compromises, I think, is going to come up again later, isn't it, Gareth?
Yeah, compromise. I mean, you don't want, of course, to change your work. It's your research, it's your intellectual property, but you know, you do have to back down on some of those issues in order to get the work published. I mean, so I would say if the reviewers are just asking for you to change the colors on a figure, I mean, what difference does it make? You might as well go ahead and do that. I think, yeah, I mean, Mary and I are pretty much on the same page with that one. How about the next one?
Great. Okay, here's another problem we heard about from our experts. This is from Jackie, and she's one of our advanced expert team, and she says, bias in peer review can be a huge issue, especially in small fields where everyone knows everyone else. Well, that's interesting. So if you work in a specialized field, Gareth, how can you work around this problem?
It's a big issue. It's a big issue, of course. And I was talking to Jackie about this. It can be a big problem. Like in my field, in paleontology, in the areas where I was working as a researcher, like even when the reviewers are double-blinded, you can often tell who they are anyway.
Right.
So I mean, that can be a huge issue. I would say that it's still worthwhile, but if you feel that you have been unfairly treated, as we talked about already in our presentation, don't be shy to write to the editor. You know, you can always send a friendly email to the editor. We can help you to do that, of course. We can help you with that with that process. We can edit and provide you with templates for these kinds of emails.
Great, and I've got some interesting questions coming in that we'll look at the end of our talk today. Some great questions from our audience about this, especially dealing or choosing reviewers in fields where you may have competitors. So we'll look at that in a little bit. So Jackie's solution was this. She says, well, we assist authors with the manuscript submission process, including which kind of peer review is best for them and for their paper. And I'm sure that plays a role in their journal selection as well.
Absolutely. And so again, like, ladies and gentlemen, if you choose to use our Edance services, then these are some of the team members that you will be working with, hand in hand, helping you with your articles and helping you deal with these kinds of issues in the process. Problem number 3.
Great, this is from our Edance expert, Ruth. Dr. Tan says, we got a vague reviewer comment that statements throughout the manuscript were insufficiently supported by citations, even though almost everything was well cited. Okay, it sounds like an unfair comment. How would you respond to that, Gareth?
It sounds like an unfair comment. Yes, I agree. But I mean, it's also quite a straightforward comment to rebut. And so our advice to authors is always, don't respond to these kinds of comments the same day, even the same week. Sit back, let the red mist, let the anger subside. If you feel that you're getting like silly comments back on your work from reviewers that don't really understand or maybe haven't even read properly what you've written, it'll feel much better in a few days' time. So in this case, I would go through the paper and I would check that everything has been cited. And of course, insufficient citations, I mean, that's a very relative thing to say. So I'd go through the paper and I would indeed check that everything has been cited, and then I would pass that back to the editor and say, hey, we've gone through the paper, we've checked everything, we are sure that everything has been adequately cited, would be my advice in that situation.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Here was Ruth's solution. She said, I think much the same thing. We checked through all the statements and references and identified a couple of places where an additional citation or two could be added or updated, then composed a rebuttal stating the actions taken and that we were confident that all claims were fully supported by the evidence cited. So much the same as you'd said, Gareth. It's maybe a fairly black and white response.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we do at Edance, ladies and gentlemen, as well as providing editing and language services. Colleagues like Dr. Tan will actually work with you on your paper. So Ruth checked the paper for an author, for a client, and the author worked with Dr. Tan to write the email, write the letter back to the editor. So again, if you feel that that's going to be something that would help you in your research or your research group, then please do get in touch with us at Edance. This, by the way, is what makes us quite different from other companies that you may have heard of or encountered before. Problem number 4.
Okay, this is from Nini on our expert team. She says, we got a peer review back from a journal recently. One peer reviewer asked us to cite one of their articles. We checked the citation and found that it was not the most recent on the topic.
That's a great one.
Okay, well, I'm interested how our audience would respond to this. So let's take a quick poll and let's see what you would do in this case. So would you say no to the reviewer, explain nicely that you will not cite their article? Or would you say yes in this case, because getting published is worth making this small compromise to your paper, citing a slightly older study rather than the newer one? Let's see what our audience thinks.
Yes, that's that key word again, yes. Compromise.
There's that word again. Okay, everyone, don't be shy, cast your votes. Let's see what you would do in this case. I know it's a tough call. It's a tough call. The audience is voting? Yeah, go ahead, Gareth, sorry.
I just want to show everybody that I am indeed still blindfolded. So
okay, results are coming in. So while our audience finishes voting, Gareth, what would be your response to this?
Actually, I would do both, I think. I would check through the article to make sure that it was the most recent or was not the most recent. I would check the veracity of what the peer reviewer was suggesting. But I would also I would put that into the paper, and I would also write to the editor and say, this is an example of a peer reviewer asking me to cite one of their own papers. So the editor would want that flagged to them as a potential, ethical, almost an ethical violation, if you like, because of course, as we've mentioned already, peer reviewers should not be asking authors to cite their own papers as a condition of getting their work published.
Right. And our poll is a close horse race here. All right, let's close the poll. It's very, very tight. Let's take a look at the results now. All right, the results are, very close. 53% of our audience today said no, and 47% said yes. Interesting. Okay, Gareth, well, let's see how our experts handled this.
There you go. It's up on the slide. There's Nini's solution to this particular conundrum. And remember, again, she's working with an author. She's working with a researcher to help them get their paper published. So
great. In this case, yeah, they chose the second option. They decided to make that small compromise in order to get the paper published. So is there a right or a wrong answer to this question, Gareth?
it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. And it would depend, of course, on the paper in question and the situation in question, because, of course, it could also be the case that the reviewer is quite right, that their work is the most recent work on that particular topic, in which case they would have a point, and indeed you potentially should be adding their paper to the article. So I think that's a really interesting problem. But as you can see, as Nini says, no further issue was raised, and in this case the article got accepted. So the author, the client, got their favored outcome. So we were able to help navigate, solutioneer the way through that particular issue.
Great, thank you, Gareth. Here's problem number 5. This is our own Dr. McGowan. He says an editor returned conflicting peer reviewer comments. One reviewer said to expand the introduction and to include additional background on X, but another reviewer said to shorten the introduction and focus only on Y. What do you do when you get conflicting peer reviewer comments, Gareth?
Well, this happens all the time, and I'm sure it's happened to many of our colleagues listening to this presentation today. You end up with 2 or more sets of peer review comments, and they say the opposite thing. One reviewer might say, take out figure 1. One reviewer might say, expand figure 1. And in these particular situations, I would say my advice would be, before doing anything, before doing any work, I would write to the editor and say, hey, there's been a conflict here between the advice that I'm getting from the peer reviewers. Which do you want me to do? But it's also possible, again, to compromise in the way that you do this with the way that you write and structure those different sections.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Gareth. So let's look at Daniel's solution. He said, we've shortened the introduction slightly and focused mainly on Y, as that was the most relevant to the present study. However, we also mentioned X in the discussion section, citing a review article for readers interested in more detail than was appropriate for this paper.
Yeah, so that's a good solution. Daniel, Dr. McGowan is the EDANS science director. He heads up our MedComms team. So he would be one of the people with the most experience managing this kind of publication process. So again, maybe you'd like to get in touch with us. Maybe you'd like to get the chance to do some work in partnership with Dr. McGowan. But just for now, let's have a look at problem number 6. Problem number 6 up there on the slide.
Okay, this is from our EDANS expert, Anthony, and he says, we submitted a review paper and were told by the editor that it would be better if the text were checked by a native English speaker. Okay,
Well, I
think we have a video of Anthony explaining this in some more detail. Can we take a look at the video?
My bad peer review experience happened to me twice. Once when I was a researcher, and again after I started working here at Edans. When I submitted my first ever review paper, I was told by a reviewer that it would be better if a native English speaker had checked the paper before it was submitted. But, you know, I am a native English speaker and I'm quite confident with my writing. I checked over the manuscript again, and in my response letter, I simply stated that I am an English native speaker and I checked the manuscript thoroughly before submission. From this experience, I wondered if the reviewers just saw that the submission was from a mostly Japanese team, from a Japanese university, and wanted to double check to make sure that the paper was fully checked in detail before it was published. It was accepted without any further comment on the English composition. While working at Edans, I had a similar situation, but the phrasing of the comment was much worse. The comment was that in this paper that we were working on, that there are so many grammatical errors and that it's not written in scientific language. But we knew that this simply wasn't true because it had gone through many rounds of writing and checking using professional medical writers, copy editors, and had native English speaking project managers who checked all of the work before submission. Since we knew that the statement wasn't true, we just politely told the reviewer that a native English speaker had checked the content to ensure that there were no grammatical errors throughout. This was accepted again after this response letter was sent. Generally, English composition can always be improved no matter who writes it, be it a native English speaker or somebody else. It's a safe comment for peer reviewers to make, even though it might not necessarily be true. Please remain polite with the reviewers, even if you don't agree with them. Telling a reviewer that they're wrong about the English composition won't help you get published. If you've already done so, just write it. If you haven't done so, have a native English speaker check it and simply state in the response letter that it's been checked and is good to go.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. So his solution, yeah, he is a native English speaker himself, and I've also experienced the exact same situation where I know it was a non-native English speaker who was checking my English revisions of a paper or the visual abstract or a presentation, and then questioning my changes. And I totally agree with Anthony's solution here. You know, we can get angry, we can get upset or defensive, but really we just have to keep a cool head. We have to take our ego, put it on the shelf, and just do whatever needs to be done to get the paper published and to let it get out there and make an impact. What do you think, Gareth? Have you experienced this as well?
I have done, yes, especially since I moved back to Hungary, like after working in Ireland and in the UK. Like, people look at the address, they look at the institution, and often, unfortunately, they think, well, it's this country or that country, so you know, it can't be well written, it can't be good science even. So like we were talking about before, and like Anthony recommends, like, take a step back, take a few days before you go back to those comments, and keep a cool head. As you just said, Scott, we've shown you some examples of emails, real emails that authors have sent to us, to editorial offices, and you don't really want to send those kinds of emails. So yeah, I mean, that's good advice. Problem number 7, perhaps the most common of all, I would say. Scott?
Right, this is from our Yumi-san, and she says, we find that authors often find it very hard to work out who to contact with their issues on journal submission sites. Very common problem.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, publishers could do a much better job of making that easier for authors around the world, but often they just don't. So I know that Yumi-san has huge experience doing this, working at a number of international journals. And so here's her solution to this problem. And we do this every day at Edans. Yes.
Right, we help them manage their submissions, write cover letters, peer review responses, which are of course extremely difficult for many people, especially if English is not your native language. Dealing with the nuance of peer review responses is very, very challenging. So our teams can help you with this.
Yep, so if you're sitting there thinking, I need help, with my next submission, I need help with my cover letter, I need help with the submission process, even the journal selection process. And don't forget that we have a fantastic journal selector tool on the EdAnse Learning Lab, free for everybody to access. So why don't you jump over there, learning.edanse.com, and have a look at some of the resources that we have available. In the meantime, here's Jackie with problem number 8.
Great. Jackie says, when papers get rejected, authors lose their marbles and rush to the next journal without thinking things through properly. Okay, there's that rejection feeling that we talked about earlier where, oh, it's a no, so I'm just going to go somewhere else and take my paper there. What's your response to this, Gareth?
Yeah, my response after a lot of experience of doing exactly what Jackie's highlighted, getting all upset and resubmitting that paper the same day that it got rejected from Nature to a regional journal in Ireland. I remember this one situation, got the paper published in the Irish Journal of Geology, which was a long way. Of course, nothing negative to say about that particular journal, of course, but it's a big difference in impact factor from Nature. So perhaps it's a good idea to take a little bit of time before rushing to the next journal with a rejected manuscript. There's Jackie's solution.
Right. Jackie says we help authors to make good decisions about journal selection. We carefully evaluate their options and perform detailed journal analyses to inform their submissions. So rather than rush on to the next one, give it a good think and consult our experts.
Absolutely. I mean, this is above and beyond the journal selection tool that we've talked about. Our team of publication specialists, people like Jackie and the other colleagues that you've seen in this presentation, they will work with you and do an analysis of the journals that are out there in your field that could be appropriate for your paper, and you'll get all of that back at the end so you can make an informed decision about what you're going to do with your next article. So brilliant. That was, I think, quite useful. I learned a lot from those slides. So yeah, thanks to all our team members for getting involved in our presentation today. I think it's nice to see some people who are not just me and you, Scott. Don't you think so?
That's right. Yes, definitely. People get tired of seeing us, I think. Great. Okay, now it's time for your questions. I can see some fantastic questions. Thanks to everyone who asked your questions. We'll try to get to all of them today. If for some reason we can't get to your question, then we will definitely address your questions by email. You can write to us. So before we get to those questions, we do have a gift for you today. We've got a discount code on all of our services. It's 10% off, and that's good for the next 6 months. So the code is impact-2. So head on over to EdAnse if you need any support with your research cycle, whether it's preparing, performing your research, publishing, peer review, post-dissemination, promotion, all the P's. Come visit us and we'll give you a discount.
Absolutely.
Let's try some of these. Yeah.
Learning.edanse.com, edanse.com, and here's our learning lab. I mean, we do encourage you to have a look at what we have there online. I mean, EdAnse Learning Lab, fantastic resources for especially researchers getting started in the research process. 25 quick courses, more than 100 guides and infographics, 1,000 searchable downloads, and lots of ebooks as well, and all those smart tools that I talked about that Scott and I have highlighted in this presentation today. So maybe you've got a few minutes spare at the end of the webinar. Maybe you'll share this webinar with other colleagues, but we do encourage you to go on over there to learning.edanse.com, check out what we have on offer on our site. Now, of course, as Scott has mentioned, we will be taking any of your questions. And thanks again for everybody who came along to our presentation today. So I'll hand back to Scott, and we'll see if we can answer as many of your questions as possible in the time that we have left today.
Great, thanks everyone for your questions. Let's try this one, Gareth. This question is from Sudip, and the question is, how do you avoid giving reviewers who are would-be competitors and yet experts in the field? So how do you avoid competitors as reviewers?
This is a great question. Thank you for this question, Sudit. Like, you will find that on your journal submission site, there will probably be a field on the submission system where you can oppose reviewers. Okay, lots of journals have submission systems. We mentioned a few of them already in our presentation today. Manuscript Central, Scholar One, Editorial Manager, Open Journal Systems are three of the most common. Many publishers have their own systems too. You will put your paper into that system. You will encounter a field where you can oppose reviewers. And in those boxes, you can write Dr. Dyke, and then they'll often ask you for a reason. You can say, Dr. Dyke is a competitor, or Dr. Dyke has previously provided negative reviews about my work in the past. So you can oppose reviewers. If you are making a submission where there's no option to oppose reviewers on the submission system, then of course you'll want to put that into your cover letter. Okay, so don't be shy, Sudit, if you feel that there are colleagues out there who you don't want reviewing your paper. You've got reasons for that, I'm sure, either in the cover letter or in the online system. Thanks for that great question, though. Brilliant question. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, we'll try to get to all of these excellent questions. Here's a question from Bindu, and Bindu asks, sometimes the review process goes on and on with new questions. How do you cope with this?
Yeah, I call this moving the goalposts. So you might submit a paper to a journal and it comes back with review comments. You answer those comments, you send it back to the journal, the paper goes out for review again, and the reviewers come back with different comments, new problems. So this is an issue in the peer review process. We know about it. What you should do in these situations is directly contact the editor. Get in touch with the editor and say, editor, dear editor, do it politely, of course. Bindu, you don't want to be writing angry emails, but like, you know, I did all of the changes requested in first review, and now the reviewers are raising additional concerns. I would like to highlight this. They should have, of course, raised any concerns about your paper in the first review. It's not fair on the authors if the reviewers are moving the goalposts, but editors are aware of this. You should write to them, point this out, and I hope that they will say, fine, like you made the changes after first review, your paper will now proceed. But thanks for that great question. Very common issue. Thank you for that.
Great question. Yes, thank you. Let's go on to our next question here. This is from Keiko, and Keiko asks, I responded to comments from 3 reviewers and 2 of them accepted our response. However, 1 reviewer still expressed concerns about our manuscript, and so 1 additional reviewer was invited. So this 4th reviewer gave us totally different comments from what we received from previous reviewers and denied our manuscript. We did not have an opportunity to respond to the 4th reviewer, which I thought we could fully respond to their comment. And because of that, our paper was rejected based on the comments from reviewer 4.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really, really, really unfortunate and
Tough.
Really quite common as well. I'm afraid to say that what's happened there is that the editor's gotten conflicting comments from the peer reviewers. And keep in mind, of course, that a lot of the comments that editors get to see about your papers, you never get to see as an author. Some journals have lots of forms and other online boxes to tick that they ask peer reviewers to fill in that they don't share with the author. So in this situation, probably almost certainly what's happening is that the reviewers in the first round had conflicting overall opinions of the paper, probably quite far apart. The editors asked for a 4th opinion, as you've said, and that's been negative, unfortunately, for the paper. So in this situation, if you feel that you can address all of the comments that the 4th reviewer has made, then that's going to be a soft rejection. You can write, of course, to the editor, and you can say that. You can say, we have revised the paper. We feel we can adequately address all of the comments that were raised by reviewer 4. Please, can we resubmit a new manuscript, a new submission to your journal? Okay, so I recommend that course of action, directly contacting the editor, saying that you can address these comments and going back again, can we make a new submission? And I hope it works. Let us know, please, what the outcome of this situation is. But thank you for the question. Great question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Keiko. And if you do come to a resolution, as Gareth says, let us know. We'd love to hear how that turned out for you. Let's go on to our next question. This is a question from Pradeep, and the question is, this is interesting. I have faced instances wherein a manuscript of a new technique was rejected and a similar one showed up within 6 months. Do reviewers steal ideas? How do we know, and what should we do to prevent this?
I mean, the peer review process is done by colleagues around the world. And as you know, like, it's not a professionally, there are examples of journals that have like professional editorial teams in particular subject areas who are going to review and evaluate your paper in-house. But by far, as you know, Pradeep, like most of the review that happens for journals, it's done by other academics in your field. So I'm afraid to say that there really is nothing to stop unethical colleagues doing that. But again, like, if you suspect that this has happened, I would write to the journal editor at the journal where your paper got rejected. Send them the PDF of the article that you've highlighted here for us today. Send them that PDF and say, I just wanted to raise the possibility, dear editor, that something unethical has happened in the peer review process. My paper got rejected, and then the same technique has now appeared in another paper in another journal. I mean, it depends on your field, it depends on your subject area. How likely is that to have happened by chance? But you don't lose anything by sending that information to the editor. If it turns out to be the case that the author, one of the authors on the paper that's just come out on the new method, is or was one of the peer reviewers of your paper, then, I mean, that person will get blacklisted by that journal, and something positive will have come of this at the end of the day. But I'm really sorry to hear that. Sounds like a very unfortunate situation. Why don't you consider commenting positively on the new paper that's come out? That's a separate course of action that you could take as well. We're here to help. Get in touch with us afterwards. We can talk about this issue in more detail. Thanks for the great question. Thank you.
Great, excellent question, and thank you, Gareth, for your answer. Do we have time for one or two more, Gareth? Are you getting tired yet?
No, of course not. No.
Power through. Okay, there's a couple. Here's a more of a comment than a question. It's an excellent comment. This is from Arthur, and the comment or question is, actually, reviewers may ask you to include their own papers as a reference, probably because it's a new and fresh paper on this topic, and it might be needed to better understand this topic from the author's side. Any thoughts on that, Gareth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a judgment call for editors in these situations, because of course we do get reviewers who say things like, cite my papers if you want to get this paper accepted. I mean, we've had comments like that come back from peer reviewers, in order for this paper to prove acceptable for publication, these 25 papers of mine must be added to the reference list. That's obviously not acceptable. That's obviously unethical reviewer behavior. But you're absolutely right, Arthur, like in small fields, of course, like in fields like mine and Jacqueline's, like, there may very well be only a small group of people who would be competent to review a particular paper. But we would also hope that in this day and age, like, it's possible for authors to be fully aware of what's available in their own field. So I would expect authors to be citing accurately, up to date, and be on top of the literature. So maybe an issue in the literature work that's been done if the author has missed something that's come out recently, or maybe they don't want to cite it. Authors do that also quite often. They ignore the work of competitors and things like that. So interesting question. I fully agree. But again, like, let's be careful with those reviews. We don't want to see reviews where we're being asked to cite 20 papers from a reviewer to get the paper published. Thanks for the question. Thank you for it.
Great. Time for one more, Gareth, or two perhaps.
Of course.
These are excellent questions. And again, if we don't get to your question today, feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is here. We love questions. We'd love to hear from you. So if we don't get to your question today, please don't hate us. We'll get back to you after the presentation. So this question is, this is close to my heart because it happened to me once. This is from Surya. Surya says, sometimes it seemed that reviewers ask you to quote more recent citations in the article, although an older citation might have a better explanation. So how do you deal with this situation? I ran into this on my own dissertation, and I actually had to push back against my advisor. I lost that fight. But what would you do in this case, Gareth?
This is very similar to the issue that Nini raised in her problem. I encourage you to have a listen again to the presentation when you get the recording, of course. But what I would do in this situation, because I'm a pushover, is just to cite both papers. I would say to that comment, great, thanks for the suggestion, and I'd cite both papers, because of course there's no reason why you can't do that. That keeps everybody happy. You get to keep your original citation that you put in there initially, and you put in the other paper that the reviewer is asking for. I would say in my own career, compromising with peer reviewers is important, because of course you want to do everything possible as an author to make sure that your work does get published. So that would be my approach, unless it's a really, really, really big problem and you really, really, really disagree. I would usually do what the reviewers are asking for in most situations. So that would be my comment on that. Is there any reason why you can't cite both papers? Thanks for the question. I hope that was a useful answer. Thank you very much for the question.
Great question. Okay, do we have time for one more quick one, Gareth?
Of course, absolutely.
Okay, this is from Sugihara Sensei here in Japan. And the question is, what about rejection by the journal before it gets to review? So I guess this is desk rejection. And in this case, he says, I asked the editor, but there was no answer about it. And he feels they should reply, because the editor is not necessarily, or whomever saw that paper first, may not necessarily be an expert in that field. So what do you do in this case if the paper gets rejected before it's seen, or hopefully seen, by an expert? What can you do?
That's a really tough one. And of course, the higher impact factor the journal has, the more that happens. Big journals like Nature and Science, as you know, Sensei, will reject lots of papers at the desk stage, at the triage stage. And often, as you correctly point out, that rejection might not be happening based on an evaluation by a subject area specialist. Unfortunately, all you can do in those kinds of situations is try to get in touch with the journal. And so in these situations, our team can help. We had a situation just last week that we were dealing with in our team, in Dr. McGowan's team, where almost exactly that happened. And the journal, in this case, very high profile, very high impact factor journal, what we did was we phoned them up. We phoned up the editorial office. One of our team made the call, and we talked. We were able to, after a number of attempts, we were able to actually get to talk directly with the editor. So that is a good example, I think, of how working with EdAnts can help in these kinds of situations. We have the time to make lots of phone calls and get in touch with editors and really push those issues. So yeah, the only solution, Sensei, is to try to contact the editorial office at the journal and explain why you really do feel that the paper should get out for review. So again, thanks for the question, and we would love to help you with that question if appropriate. Thank you very much.
Great, these are all fantastic questions. I wish we had time to answer all of them right here on camera, but I think Dr. Dyke has to get on to some of his other important tasks. Thank you so much, Gareth, for taking time today. And again, if we didn't get to your question, please email us. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see if we can help you with that. And we'd love to hear how some of your nightmare peer review problems have worked out in the end. And again, don't forget your discount code if you need any help from our team across the whole research cycle, the research process, then please reach us here at the website below. And thank you all so much for coming today. It was great to see everyone and get fantastic questions from everyone.
Yes, thank you, Scott. It's been wonderful again to see everybody. And again, like, don't forget to join us for our next EdAnts webinar. Secret time, secret location. You'll have to stay in touch with us. You'll have to join us on the Learning Lab, sign up there for one of our My EdAnts premium memberships, maybe like just $30 per year gives you complete access to all of our educational content. $30 per year, $30 per year. That's got to be worth it, in my opinion. So thank you very much for listening. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon in our next presentation. Good evening.